Some men lose their children to distance. A job across the country, a marriage that pulls them somewhere new, a life that simply grows in a different direction. That's a normal kind of losing. That's the kind you can live with, because underneath it, love is still there, just stretched thin across some miles. What happened to me wasn't that. What happened to me was two grown men I raised with my own two hands, looking me dead in the eye and telling me to disappear. Not drift away. Not grow apart. Disappear. And when I finally did exactly what they asked, when I actually gave them the silence they demanded, they discovered something they never expected. Silence has a price tag. And I was the only one who'd ever been paying it. My name is Bob Hendricks. Everyone calls me Bob. I'm 54 years old, and for the last 26 years I've run Hendricks Mechanical out of Aurora, Colorado, a commercial HVAC company that keeps the heat running in half the office buildings and hospitals in the metro area. I built that business from a single truck and a toolbox my own father left behind when he walked out on my mother and never looked back. I was 9 years old when he left. 9 years old, standing at a window, watching a taillight disappear down our street, waiting for a man who was never coming home. I promised myself something that night at that window, the kind of promise a 9-year-old makes without understanding what it will cost him 30 years later. I promised that if I ever had sons, they would never stand at a window wondering if their father loved them enough to stay. I kept that promise for 27 years. I was at every game, every graduation, every 2 a.m. trip to the emergency room. And 3 months ago, that promise turned into the loneliest month of my entire life. Welcome to the story of how I lost my sons by giving them everything, and how I got my life back by giving them nothing. Stick around. If you've ever loved someone who made you feel like a burden for loving them, you're going to feel every second of this one. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and let's get into it. The man I built myself to be. I need you to understand who I was before any of this happened, because it matters for everything that comes after. I met my wife Diane in 1997, working the counter at a hardware store 2 blocks from the first apartment I ever rented on my own. She had this laugh that made strangers turn around in the aisle to see what was funny, and I fell for her before she ever learned my name. We got married 18 months later in her parents' backyard in Lakewood, folding chairs and string lights and a cake her mother baked herself. It wasn't fancy. It was ours. Ethan came first, born in the spring of 2000. Marcus followed 3 years later. I remember standing in the hospital hallway the night Ethan was born, this tiny red-faced thing wrapped in a blue blanket, and making myself the same promise all over again, out loud this time, quiet enough that only Diane heard it. This one is never going to wonder if I love him. Never. Not for one single day of his life. So I worked. God, did I work. I started Hendricks Mechanical with 1 used service van and $11,000 I'd saved scraping by as an apprentice technician for 6 years. I took every call, every emergency, every 3 a.m. boiler failure at some downtown office tower because I needed the money and I needed my boys to have things I never had. A house with a yard. Braces when they needed them. College paid in full, no loans, no debt, no starting their adult lives already underwater. By the time Ethan was in middle school, Hendricks Mechanical had 11 employees and a maintenance contract with 3 hospital systems. By the time Marcus graduated high school, we had 31 employees and I was turning down contracts because we couldn't take on any more work. I coached Ethan's little league team for 6 years even though I don't think I ever really understood the infield fly rule. I drove Marcus 2 hours each way every single weekend for a travel hockey league because he loved it, and because some tiny stubborn part of me needed him to have a father in the stands, something I never had myself. I never missed a single game. Not one. In 18 years of little league and hockey and school plays and science fairs, I have exactly 0 memories of an empty seat where I should have been sitting. I paid for both of their college educations outright. Ethan went to University of Texas at Austin, business degree, no debt. Marcus stayed closer to home at Colorado State, engineering degree, also no debt. When Ethan graduated and landed his first real job at a tech firm in Austin, I co-signed the lease on a beautiful loft apartment downtown because his income alone, fresh out of school, wasn't enough to qualify on his own. When Marcus finished his engineering degree and decided to open a small custom bike shop with a business partner here in the Denver area, I put up the collateral for his startup loan because no bank in the world lends $50,000 to a 23-year-old with no credit history. I did all of it gladly. Every dollar, every signature, every late night on the phone talking one of them through a problem. I never once thought of it as a burden. I thought of it as the thing I'd been dreaming about doing since I was 9 years old, standing at a window. Diane used to tell me I was too generous, that boys need to struggle a little to appreciate what they have. I used to laugh that off. I'd tell her, I struggled enough for all 4 of us. Let them have it easy. I genuinely believed that giving my sons an easier road than mine would make them grateful men. I believed it right up until the moment I found out exactly how wrong I was. The silence begins. It started, of all things, with a letter about a lease. Ethan's building management in Austin sent an email about his upcoming renewal, the kind of routine correspondence you'd normally skim over morning coffee and forget by lunchtime. Notice of lease renewal. Guarantor verification required. I was still the guarantor on that lease 3 years in, my name and my credit propping up an apartment I'd never even seen in person except through photos on my phone. There was a small discrepancy in his income documentation that the property management company needed cleared up before I could sign the renewal, some mismatch between his stated salary and a pay stub they'd requested. Simple thing. 1 phone call, 30 seconds, and it would be handled. I called Ethan from my office on a Monday afternoon, half watching one of my technicians run diagnostics on a rooftop unit through the window behind my desk. Straight to voicemail. Fine, I figured. He's in a meeting. I left a message. Hey bud, it's Dad. Got an email from your leasing office about a discrepancy on the renewal paperwork. Nothing major, just need you to call me back so I can get it squared away before the deadline. Love you. I went back to work and thought nothing of it. By Tuesday afternoon, nothing. I called again. Voicemail again. Now I'll admit, the first small flicker of unease showed up right there, though I still didn't let myself take it seriously. Ethan doesn't always pick up on the first try, but he's never once gone a full day without at least a text back. Not once in 25 years. I called Marcus, figuring he might know if something was going on with his brother. Marcus lived only 40 minutes from us, and the 2 boys talked almost every day. Voicemail. Both of them, same day, both silent. I told myself it was nothing. Grown men get busy. I left another message, keeping my voice light even though something in my stomach had started to tighten. Guys, I really need one of you to call me back. Nothing's wrong, just some paperwork on Ethan's lease and the deadline's coming up fast. Diane noticed something was off with me at dinner that night. 26 years of marriage teaches a woman to read a shift in her husband's face before he's even aware of it himself. You barely touched your plate, she said, nodding at the chicken she'd made. What's going on with you? The boys aren't answering, I told her. Either of them. Since yesterday. She waved it off, the way any reasonable person would. They're busy, Bob. They're grown men with jobs. It's fine. She was right. I knew she was right. So why did some cold little voice in the back of my head refuse to settle down? By Wednesday, it had stopped being an annoyance and started becoming something closer to fear. The renewal deadline on Ethan's lease was now 3 days away. I called him 6 times that day. 6. I called Marcus 4 times. Every single call died in a voicemail box, and neither one of them sent so much as a single text. I stopped sleeping well. Every time I closed my eyes I saw car wrecks, I saw hospital hallways, I saw a version of the exact scene I'd been terrified of since the day each of them was born. I know how sudden the world can be. I know how fast it takes people, quiet and without warning, because I lived that exact nightmare myself at 9 years old, except in my case it wasn't death, it was abandonment, And somehow at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday night those two fears had fully merged into one another in my chest. I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in my hand, thumb hovering over Ethan's name for what felt like the 100th time that week. Diane sat up behind me. "Bob, come to bed. It's the middle of the night." "Something's wrong, Diane." My voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard from myself in years. 3 days. Neither one of them. That's not normal. That's not them. Maybe they're together somewhere. Maybe their phones died. Both phones? For 3 straight days? She didn't answer that one. I turned to look at her and watched the same cold drop hit her face that had been sitting in my chest for 2 days straight. "I think we need to go out there," I said. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." She didn't argue. That's the thing 26 years of marriage teaches you. You learn exactly which fights are worth having, and which ones you simply get up and pack a bag for. The flight to Austin. We booked the first flight out of Denver International the next morning. I remember standing at the gate watching the Rockies shrink behind the terminal glass, thinking this might be either the worst overreaction of my entire life, or it might save one of my son's lives, and having absolutely no way to know which. Diane held my hand the whole flight. Neither of us talked much. "What do you say?" "I hope our sons aren't dead" doesn't exactly make pleasant conversation over a bag of pretzels. I ran through every possible scenario in my head like some sick highlight reel I couldn't turn off. A car accident on I-35. A break-in at Ethan's apartment. Marcus, always a little too fond of his motorcycle, laid out somewhere on the side of a road. Nothing I imagined at 30,000 feet prepared me for what was actually waiting for us on the other side of that door. We landed in Austin just after 1 in the afternoon. That thick, heavy Texas heat hit us the second we stepped outside, nothing like the dry Colorado air we were used to. I rented a car at the counter, tossed our one bag in the trunk, and pointed us toward downtown. The entire drive, Diane kept repeating the same thing on a loop, like she was trying to talk herself into believing it. "They're fine. There's probably some boring explanation for all of this." "Then why won't either of them answer the phone, Diane?" 3 days. 20-something calls between the two of us. Not one text back. She went quiet after that. I think some part of her already knew, the same way some part of me already knew, that a boring explanation wasn't what was waiting for us at the end of this drive. Ethan's building rose up out of the downtown skyline, all glass and steel, the kind of address that makes a middle-class guy from Aurora feel slightly out of place pulling up in a rental sedan next to a line of luxury cars at the valet stand. We rode the elevator up to the 9th floor in complete silence. My hand was actually trembling when I raised it to knock on his door. 26 years of fatherhood, and I was standing outside my own son's apartment like a man about to identify a body in a morgue. And that's when I heard it. Music. Laughter. Loud, easy, celebratory laughter, the kind you never hear in an emergency room or at a funeral. There was a small cluster of silver balloons taped beside the doorframe, bobbing gently every time someone inside walked past a vent. That's not the sound of tragedy, I thought, and for 1/2 second, relief flooded through me so hard my knees nearly buckled. Thank God. Thank God they're both okay. I knocked. The music dipped. Footsteps approached. The latch clicked, and the door swung open to reveal my oldest son, Ethan, drink in hand, wearing a wide grin that froze halfway between surprise and something far colder, something I hadn't seen on his face since he was 17 and got caught sneaking back in past curfew. That grin didn't stay confused for long. It curdled into something else entirely. And in that half second before he opened his mouth, some part of me, the part that had spent 3 sleepless nights terrified my son was lying somewhere hurt, already knew the truth. I hadn't flown 1,000 miles to rescue my boys from a tragedy. I had flown 1,000 miles straight into an ambush I never once saw coming. The party. What are you guys doing here? Not Dad. Not Mom. Not even is everything okay? Just what are you guys doing here, like we were a couple of door-to-door salesmen he was already trying to figure out how to get rid of. I kept my voice steady even though my whole chest felt like it was folding in on itself. I've been calling for 3 days, Ethan. You didn't answer either of us. I thought something happened to you. Diane pushed past me a step, both hands flying up to her mouth, and for 1 second, 26 years of motherhood poured out of her all at once. Oh, thank God, honey, you're okay. We've been calling for 3 days straight. We were sick with worry. Ethan cut her off before she even finished the sentence. He rolled his eyes, not a small eye roll either, a full, dramatic, I can't believe I have to deal with this eye roll, the kind kids give you when you ask them to unload the dishwasher. We didn't answer because we didn't want to talk to you, he said, voice sharp, flat, final. Stop calling us. We have our own lives, Dad. You're suffocating us. Just stay on your own. Stay on your own. 4 words. I have been hit by a lot of things in my life. A ladder that gave out from under me on a rooftop job in 2004. A rogue delivery truck backing into my van in a parking lot. My own father's absence for 45 straight years. None of it landed the way those 4 words landed standing in that doorway. I stood there in the hallway, those balloons bobbing gently behind my son's shoulder like the whole building was mocking me, and I genuinely did not know what to say. 26 years, every game, every scraped knee, every college tuition check written without a single loan attached to it, and this was the return on the investment. Before I could find any words at all, a young woman stepped up beside Ethan, holding a glass of champagne, her whole posture radiating a kind of smug exhaustion I'd only ever seen on reality television. Honestly, she said, crossing her arms, do you guys ever stop hovering? It's exhausting. Diane blinked at her, completely lost. I'm sorry, who are you? The woman's smile widened. She raised her left hand slowly, deliberately, the way someone presents evidence in a courtroom. A ring caught the hallway light and threw it right back into our faces. I'm Brianna, she said. His fiancée. And today is our engagement party, which you are currently ruining by showing up uninvited. Uninvited. Ruining. I heard the words land, but for a second they didn't fully register, like my brain refused delivery on a package it already knew would hurt too much to open. Our son, engaged, and we found out standing in a hallway, being told we were ruining it. 26 years of marriage, and I have never once seen Diane look the way she looked in that moment, like someone had reached directly into her chest with a bare hand. Now I want to pause right here, because this is the part where anyone who's never lived through it would say, Bob, just walk away, don't make a scene. And believe me, part of me was already halfway back to the elevator in my head. But another part of me, the part that flew 1,000 miles because I genuinely believed my sons might be hurt somewhere, that part needed to understand exactly how a father goes from he's calling because he loves us to he's suffocating us without a single conversation happening in between. I found out very quickly. And I'll tell Diane later that night on the flight home, it wasn't the insults, it wasn't the entitlement, it wasn't even that girl's smug little smile that broke me. It was knowing they'd seen our names on their phones. They saw us calling. They knew we were worried sick. And they chose, on purpose, to let us suffer for 3 straight days. That's not independence. That's cruelty with a return address. But that clarity came later. Right there in the hallway, all I had was a dry mouth and a wife quietly falling apart beside me. And behind all that heartbreak, there was something else too, something Diane hadn't even said out loud yet, though I knew exactly what she was thinking, because I was thinking it too. Back home, sitting in our safe deposit box, was her mother's antique wedding ring, a ring she'd kept polished and wrapped in the same soft cloth for over 15 years, dreaming about the day she'd slide it onto the finger of whatever woman our son eventually chose to marry. And instead, she was standing in a hallway in Austin, being treated like an intruder at a party celebrating a ring that was never even supposed to be hers to give. Marcus appeared in the doorway right about then, holding a tray of what smelled like barbecue, and groaned the second he saw us, actually groaned, like we were an inconvenience he thought he'd already dealt with. Are you serious right now? He set the tray down hard enough to rattle the plates on it. You guys couldn't just let us have this one day? I felt something steady itself inside my chest right then. Fear was turning into something else. I don't know if it was anger yet. Maybe just clarity. Son, I said, keeping my voice level, I didn't come here to ruin anything. Your leasing office sent an urgent notice. Your renewal deadline is in 3 days, and because I'm the guarantor, I needed to verify a detail before signing off on it so you don't lose this apartment. I called your brother. Then I called you. Neither of you answered for 3 days. Marcus let out a short, mocking laugh, the kind that has no actual humor in it, just contempt wearing humor's jacket. Oh, here we go again, the savior complex. He shook his head slowly, like he was talking down to a child instead of the man who'd co-signed his business loan 2 years earlier. You think because you put your name on some paperwork, you get to track our every move? This is exactly why I moved 40 minutes away instead of just staying at home. We wanted distance from you. Ethan nodded along like his brother had just delivered some kind of profound insight, then leaned back against the doorframe, arms crossed, drink still in his hand. Exactly. You always use money and fixing things just to keep tabs on us and feel important. I pay my own rent now with my own job. I don't need you hovering over me, acting like some hero. He paused. We saw your calls. We purposely didn't answer. We wanted to see how long it would take you to finally get the hint and leave us alone. Purposely, Dad. Not that we were busy. Not that our phones died. On purpose. For 3 straight days, I had sat awake picturing every possible danger my sons could be in. The entire time, they were sitting somewhere watching my name light up their screens, deciding on purpose to let their own father suffer just to teach him a lesson. Brianna tossed her hair back, clearly bored of the whole exchange by now. Yeah, she said, we're trying to celebrate our future with people who actually matter. We don't need this old drama here. She gestured vaguely down the hallway toward the elevator, the way you'd shoo off a delivery driver. Please leave. Please leave. In my own son's doorway, by a woman I'd met 4 minutes earlier. Please leave. I want you to understand something about me, because it matters for everything that happens after this moment. I didn't yell. I've thought about that a lot since. Whether I should have raised my voice, whether some part of them needed to see me break the way they'd just broken their mother right in front of them. But that's not who I am. My own father never got the chance to teach me how to handle a moment like that. I had to figure it out for myself, standing in that hallway with balloons bobbing behind my son's head like some cruel decoration mocking the whole scene. I looked at the 2 boys I had poured my entire life into, the boys I'd promised the second I held them in the hospital that they'd never know what I knew growing up. They stood there in a lifestyle my signature and my credit had built, the apartment, the business loan, the safety net under every single one of their feet, completely blind to it, treating their own mother like something to be swept off the doorstep. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just reached over, gently took my sobbing wife's hand, and turned toward the elevator. Behind us, I heard Brianna mutter something to Ethan. I didn't catch the words, and honestly, I didn't need to. The tone said enough. They wanted to be on their own. And by the following week, they were going to get exactly what they'd asked for. If you've made it this far, drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed, because it's about to get a lot more interesting. The flight home. The elevator ride down felt longer than the entire flight from Denver. Diane stood beside me, silent, staring at the mirrored doors, tears running steady down her face without a single sound coming out of her. I've seen my wife cry plenty of times in 26 years, at her father's funeral, at both boys' graduations, but I had never once seen her cry like that. Silent. Hollow. Like something inside her had simply stopped working. We didn't talk in the lobby. We didn't talk in the rental car on the way to the airport, even though I kept glancing over, waiting for her to say something, anything, just so I'd know she was still in there. She finally spoke somewhere around the airport exit, staring out at the passing traffic like it might have an answer for her. 15 years, she said quietly. I kept that ring polished for 15 years, Bob. I didn't ask which ring. I already knew. I used to imagine the day I'd give it to her, she went on, her voice cracking. Whoever he chose. I imagined telling her the story behind it, my mother wearing it every single day of her marriage. I imagined I don't know what I imagined. Not that. Not being told I'm ruining a party I didn't even know was happening. Her hands were shaking in her lap. What do you say to that? What is there to say? I reached over and took her hand off her lap and held it the rest of the drive, and neither of us said another word until we were sitting at the gate waiting to board. The flight home was the quietest 2.5 hours of my life, and I've sat through some quiet hours. Diane stared out the window the entire time, watching Texas shrink and disappear beneath the clouds, tears slipping down every few minutes like her body had simply given up trying to stop them. I held her hand and said nothing. What was there to say? It'll be fine? It wasn't fine. They didn't mean it? They meant every word. They'd told us themselves they'd planned it, watched the calls come in, and chosen silence on purpose. They're just going through a phase? 25 and 22 is not a phase. That's a grown man's decision made in full daylight with a fiancé cheering him on from the doorway. I just held her hand and let the silence say what neither of us had the strength to say out loud yet. Somewhere over New Mexico, staring at the seat back in front of me, something shifted inside my chest, quiet but permanent, like a door closing somewhere deep in a house you thought you knew every room of. I gave them everything I never had. Every game, every scraped knee, every ounce of protection a boy without a father spends his whole life dreaming about giving his own kids someday. And somehow, in giving them all of that, I built two men who look at me like I'm the villain in their own story. 26 years. And this was the return. By the time we touched down in Denver, something in me had already made a decision, even though I didn't have the words for it yet. I just knew the man walking off that plane wasn't the same one who'd boarded terrified for his sons' lives a few hours earlier. That man was gone, and whatever was left of him was about to make a phone call his sons would remember for the rest of their lives. They wanted to be left alone, so I left them alone. Legally, financially, completely. And by the time they figured out what that actually meant, it was already too late to undo it. The floor. You know what nobody tells you about heartbreak? It doesn't announce itself right away. It waits. It lets you walk through your own front door first. Lets you set your bags down. Lets you think, for one merciful second, that maybe the worst of it is already behind you. And then it takes your wife's legs right out from under her. We walked into our house in Aurora a little after 10 that night, and the silence hit us differently than it ever had before. 26 years in that house. Countless nights coming home from Little League games, from hockey rinks, from every ordinary moment that used to fill those rooms with noise. That night, the quiet felt like it had teeth. Diane made it 2 steps past the front hall before her knees simply gave out. She went down onto the living room floor, right there on the rug her own mother had given us as a wedding gift, and she cried the way you cry when someone dies. Not the composed, dignified crying she'd done in that hallway in front of strangers. The real thing, the kind that comes from somewhere underneath your ribs. I stood there for a second just watching her, and something in my chest cracked clean open. 26 years of marriage, and I had never once felt this helpless. I got down on the floor with her. I didn't say anything smart. I didn't try to fix it, which if you know me is a small miracle in itself, because fixing things is the only language I've ever really known how to speak. I just held her while she cried into my shoulder, and I let myself ask the question that had been chasing me since we left Austin. Where did we go wrong? I gave them everything I never had, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. I was there for every single moment. I was the father I always wished for. And somehow, in doing that, I turned them into people who look at me like I'm the enemy. Diane lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen, and said the only thing that made any sense that whole night. No, Bob. You didn't turn them into anything. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. they did that themselves. You just handed them a life they never had to work for. And people who never have to work for something never learn to be grateful for it. I held my wife on that living room floor until almost midnight. And somewhere in there, I made myself a promise. The only person who had stood by me through every single version of my life, good, bad, terrified, exhausted, was lying right there in my arms. My sons had their own lives now. They'd made that painfully, deliberately clear. So I decided right then that I was going to honor their wish, and I was going to spend whatever time I had left loving the one person who had actually earned it. We didn't sleep much that night. We talked, really talked, the kind of conversation 26 years of marriage lets you have without needing to explain half of it. We agreed on one thing above everything else. Whatever happened next, we'd move together. No solo decisions, no guilt trips down memory lane that would soften either of us at the wrong moment. By sunrise, we were aligned. And Bob Hendricks aligned with his wife is not a man you want standing between you and a phone. The phone call to Paul. I called my attorney, Paul Nakamura, at exactly 8:05 a.m. He picked up on the second ring. The man has handled Hendricks Mechanical's contracts for almost 12 years. He knows when I'm calling about a supplier dispute and when I'm calling about something else entirely. This was clearly something else. Bob, he said, you sound like a man who didn't sleep. I need you to pull my name off Ethan's lease guarantee, I said. Today, before the renewal window closes. There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause a good lawyer gives you when he wants to make sure you're not about to do something you'll regret by lunchtime. You sure about that? Once that renewal lapses without your backing, the property management system flags it automatically. No warning period, no grace window on a building like that. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. Paul didn't argue further. By 10 that morning, the withdrawal was filed. By 2 in the afternoon, it was processed. The renewal deadline came and went at midnight with no signature attached to it, because for the first time in 3 years, there was no Bob Hendricks standing behind that lease like an invisible steel beam nobody had ever bothered to notice was even there. They wanted to prove they didn't need me hovering over their lives. I decided to give them the closest thing to proof a man in my position could offer. I didn't hear anything for 2 days, which frankly felt almost funny given everything that had just happened. The same silence that had nearly destroyed me a week earlier now felt like the most peaceful 2 days I'd had in months. But I wasn't finished, and I want to be honest with you about that, because I think it matters. I didn't stop at the lease. Over the following week, I looked at every other financial thread still tying my name to theirs. You can't just cross your name off a cosigned loan with a single phone call, but you can absolutely force the bank's hand. I called our relationship manager at the bank that held Marcus's business line of credit for his bike shop, the one secured by collateral against my own company's assets. I officially revoked the authorization for him to use my collateral going forward. The bank froze his existing draw within 48 hours and issued a formal demand letter requiring him to secure new collateral within 30 days or face default proceedings on the outstanding balance. Next, I called the lender holding the note on Ethan's car, a note I'd cosigned 2 years earlier when his credit history was still too thin to qualify a loan. I informed them in writing that as cosigner, I was formally withdrawing any future guarantee of delinquent payments going forward. Since Ethan's credit score on its own was still fairly weak, the bank immediately flagged the loan as high risk and demanded an accelerated restructuring within 60 days. I didn't do any of it out of anger. I want to be clear about that. I just let the financial institutions do exactly what they do best. Look at my son's actual worth without my shadow covering them from head to toe. They asked to be on their own. I was just letting the banks show them precisely what that meant. The fall. They showed up on our porch about 3.5 weeks later. They didn't have much of a choice. Austin had chewed both of them up and spit them right back out the second my name vanished from underneath every safety net in their lives. Ethan's eviction notice hit fast. The building system flagged the missing guarantor exactly the way Paul warned me it would, and management issued a formal notice to vacate with a 7-day non-compliance penalty that doubled his monthly rent until he was out. He couldn't afford to fight it and risk an actual eviction judgment landing on his public record, not with a wedding coming up and his own credit already thin. Marcus's bike shop, meanwhile, folded within 3 weeks once the frozen credit line choked off his ability to restock inventory. His business partner bailed the second the financial trouble became obvious, taking what was left of the shop's equipment with him as part of an ugly, rushed dissolution agreement neither of them had the money to fight properly. They didn't call first. They just pulled a rented cargo van right up to our curb in Aurora one Thursday evening, looking like two ghosts of the successful young men they'd been standing in that doorway in Austin only a month earlier. Marcus was the one doing the knocking, hard and fast, his face pale and furious, pounding on the door like it owed him an apology. I opened it, let them in, sat them down in the living room, the same room where Diane had collapsed on the rug weeks earlier, and let them say whatever they'd driven 18 straight hours from Austin to say. Ethan went first, and he was crying before he even got through the doorway. Real tears this time, not the performance from the hallway. Though it took me a minute to remember that real tears don't automatically mean real accountability. How could you do this to us? His voice broke on every other word. We're your family. You're destroying our lives over one argument. I'm getting married in 4 months, Dad. One argument? I asked, my voice entirely empty of emotion. You watched your mother and me call you for 3 days straight while we were sick with worry. Ethan, you ignored us on purpose to teach me a lesson. Now the world is teaching you one. His face shifted then, grief curdling fast into something uglier, a desperate kind of panic I hadn't seen from him since he was a teenager. You're just a control freak who wants to watch us fail, he said, his voice rising, echoing off the hardwood floor. You've always been like this. You can't stand that we don't need you anymore. This is some sick revenge plot because we didn't invite you to a party. I didn't flinch. I don't want to see you fail, son. But you told me you didn't need me hovering over you acting like a hero. I'm just honoring your wish. If you truly don't need me, then you don't need my name on your lease. You don't need my collateral for a business. And you don't need my signature backing your loans. That's not revenge. That's adulthood. Ethan's jaw tightened. I watched him search for another angle, the way a man searches his own pockets for keys he already knows aren't there. Mom would never let this happen, he said, desperate now, pivoting hard. You're doing this behind her back, aren't you? You're punishing us because you're bitter. That's when Diane stepped into the room from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, voice steadier than I'd heard from her since before that hallway in Austin. Your father and I are on the same page, she said, firm, solid, not a single crack in it. We talked about this together. We both agreed to honor your wish to be left alone. Marcus, who'd been quiet up to that point, finally cracked. Mom, you can't be serious right now. I stood up from my chair, walked over, and put my hand gently on Diane's shoulder. So here we are, I said. We're leaving you alone. Good luck to both of you. I watched something in both of their faces finally understand, really understand, that this wasn't a phase, wasn't a bluff, wasn't a father who'd cave the second his sons cried hard enough sitting in his own living room. I listened to them cry and blame me for their own mess. They tried to make me feel guilty for their eviction, for their collapsed business, for every choice they themselves had made along the way. But I felt nothing except clarity. These were the same 2 men who stood in a doorway and told me I was suffocating them. The same 2 men who watched their own mother's heart break without so much as a flinch. They didn't want my help when I was offering it freely, out of love, no strings attached. They just wanted someone to blame the moment they realized they couldn't do any of it alone. They left that night without another word. I heard the van door slam outside, heard the engine fade down the street, and Diane and I stood in that living room in a silence that, for the first time in weeks, didn't feel like grief. It felt like peace. The trust. I went to see Paul again the following week, and this time it wasn't about a lease or a loan. I want to rewrite the trust, I told him, sliding my coffee aside to make room for the folder he'd brought along. Completely. He looked up at me over his glasses, the same careful look he'd given me the day I pulled Ethan's guarantee. How completely? If I go first, everything goes to Diane. If she goes first, everything comes to me. And if we're both gone, I paused, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something settle in my chest instead of tearing through it. $0 go to the boys. Instead, there's a scholarship foundation I want set up. For kids whose fathers serve overseas and don't come home the way mine didn't. Kids who'd give absolutely anything just to have a father call them once and actually mean it. That's where it goes. All of it. Paul didn't ask me to reconsider. He simply nodded, made the note, and got to work. My own father was taken from me by a decision he made all on his own, a decision he never explained, standing at a window watching taillights disappear down a street. I grew up without him, and I swore my children would never know that particular kind of ache. And somehow, in giving them absolutely everything I never had, I raised two boys who took a loving father completely for granted. My sons don't need my money. They've made that abundantly clear, twice now, once in a doorway in Austin and once again in my own living room. But there are kids out there right now, real kids in real houses, growing up with a folded flag on a mantle somewhere, who would trade almost anything just to have a father worth calling. My legacy isn't going to the sons who pushed their own mother out of a doorway. It's going to the children who'd actually give anything to have a father worth calling in the first place. Ethan's wedding, from what I understand, got quietly scaled back to something far smaller than the version Brianna had originally planned. I don't know if they went through with it in the end. I honestly don't know, and some days that not knowing sits heavier on me than I expect it to. I won't lie to you and pretend it didn't sting to hear any of this. It did. Some nights it still does. But every single time that ache creeps back in, I remember the hallway. I remember stay on your own. I remember watching my wife's face fall apart over a ring that never got its moment. And the ache settles right back down where it belongs. Diane and I sit out on our back deck most evenings now, right around sunset, coffee in hand, watching the sky do its slow fade over the same Aurora backyard where two boys once learned to ride bikes. I stayed up half the night assembling myself. She reached over one evening not too long ago and put her hand on mine the way she's done 1,000 times across 26 years. I looked at her and realized something simple and true. My father died to me the day he chose to leave when I was 9 years old. I spent my whole life trying to become the man he never got the chance to be. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that the only person I truly needed to protect the entire time was the woman sitting right beside me on that deck. My sons have their own lives now. They made that crystal clear standing in a doorway in Austin. And my wife and I, we have each other. And that, it turns out, is more than enough. If this story hit home for you, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one.